Alright, now we are here to talk about carbohydrates, and this is one of those macromolecules, one of those very important ones. First thing we'll start off with are the functions of carbohydrates. First and foremost, carbohydrates are sources of stored energy. This is going to be your body's preferred source of energy. Anytime we talk about going through and making ATP, which is chemical energy inside a cell, we are always going to start with a carbohydrate. So when we talk about stored energy, everything that turns into energy is going to break down to glucose, which is a carbohydrate, and that's going to be what kickstarts the process to making ATP. So this is kind of the biggie right there, is that carbohydrates are stored sources of energy. They also transport energy within complex organisms. As a structural material, the cell walls of plants are made up of cellulose, which is a very rigid structural component to the plants that allow them to stand up, since they don't have a real skeleton made of bones like us. And carbohydrates also play a role in the cell membrane in signaling things and allowing cells to talk to each other, and they make up part of the molecules that float around in our blood and in our interstitial fluid that help signal things. So carbohydrates play kind of a big role here for us. Usually when we talk about carbohydrates, they're going to have a hydroxyl group, which is one of those functional groups that we were talking about. Hydroxyl is an OH at the end of a chain, and carbohydrates come in two basic forms when we talk about the monomer. Hopefully you remember the monomer for carbohydrates are monosaccharides. Those monosaccharides can either be pentoses or hexoses. Pent meaning 5, hex meaning 6. So in a pentose, we're going to have 5 carbons making that up, and in a hexose, you're going to have 6 carbons making that up. So with our pentoses, we have ribose and deoxyribose. Those are big for DNA right there and RNA. And then for our hexoses, you have glucose, fructose, galactose, and mannose. What do you notice about every one of these words? Every one of them has OSE at the end. So if you see OSE, you can be pretty confident that we're talking about a carbohydrate. And that's one of those clues that you need to use in this class. A lot of this class, when you get to your AP Bio exam, you're going to see things and you have to associate words with their properties and how they interact. So if you see OSE, you need to know right off the top of your head, there's going to be a hydroxyl group, it's a carbohydrate, it stores energy, it's a structural thing. All of those things just sort of need to flow into your head. So make sure you're looking for these clues as we go through things in this class. Through glycosidic linkage, a monosaccharide hooks up with another monosaccharide to become a disaccharide. An oligosaccharide has up to 8 monomers put together, and a polysaccharide has longer. We can absolutely make longer chains, but each one of these individual monomers, these guys are going to have 6 carbons in that chain, in their individual monomer. These ones are going to have 5, and we can hook those up into long chains to make very large macromolecules. Here's some examples of what they look like, and one thing you'll notice is that we have a numbering system here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Look right here. We have functional group, we have a functional group, we have a functional group. There's another one hanging out over here. We have functional groups hanging out all over the place. Same thing down here. These are 6 carbon chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll talk about the numbering and how that works in class a little bit more. And we'll talk about how to draw these things, because realistically it's crazy to draw all this stuff. I'll do a little OChem in here, teach you it. We just draw lines, and that sort of takes up the place. But these are all our 6 carbon sugars, and carbohydrates are always considered sugars. OSE, you see that suffix, start thinking sugar right off the top of your head. When I have 2 monomers, glucose and fructose, look at that. We got the OH highlighted there. We got the H from this one highlighted here. Look what happened. Water came out. So what is that? If water's coming out and these guys are forming a bond, hopefully you remember that that is condensation, because water's coming out. And just think about it. If you've ever had a glass on a hot day in a humid area, water condenses on the outside. Water molecules are taken out from the side of the glass, or clouds are created by condensation. Water molecules are bunched together. That's basically what's happening here. These two things go through a condensation reaction and get hooked together. Look, that O that was sitting right there that got left by its H right here, He's sitting right here, and there's a bridge. It creates a bridge between the 1 and the 2 right over there. So that's how this polymerization happens with this. And if I wanted to break this, I'd add water in through a hydrolysis reaction and separate it back into glucose fructose. Again, it goes back and forth in biology. What do we need to know with carbohydrates? Monosaccharides are the simple sugars. Those are the monomers. Those are just considered very simple sugars that sort of are the building blocks of the carbohydrate chains. When we talk about polysaccharides, starches and glycogen are the two very important long chains. Starches are going to be stored energy for plants. Glycogen is going to be stored energy for animals. That's an important thing that you guys should know. Starches are stored for plants. Glycogen is stored in you, me, and every other animal out there. Those stored carbohydrates are going to reduce osmotic pressure, which is something we'll talk about when we get to membranes, but it has to do with maintaining good gradients inside and outside of cells. Glucose changes that a little bit more, so it's important that we can store these carbohydrates and have that potential stored energy waiting for later, especially in places like muscles. Your muscles store a lot of glycogen because your muscles need a lot of energy to move. And by having a lot of glycogen in there, it makes it so that the cell doesn't over or under inflate based on water going in and out because of this osmotic pressure. Again, something we'll talk about when we get to diffusion. Cellulose is a very stable polysaccharide, and this is one that we talked about was in those cell walls of the plants. Since plants don't have bony skeletons, they need something to help stand upright. In combination with turgor pressure, cellulose helps keep the plants upright. And that's about where we're going to stop with carbohydrates for now.